In May 2003, US President George W. Bush announces the end of major combat operations in the Iraq War. Coalition forces quickly toppled Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist regime, but failed to capture the Iraqi dictator. The US has around 142,000 troops in the region, supported by 45,000 British and smaller Australian and Polish contingents. The coalition shifts to Phase 4 operations, post-war occupation and reconstruction. However, commanders complain of a lack of pre-war planning, direction, and resources, and looting becomes widespread. Coalition troops do not find weapons of mass destruction, the supposed presence of which Washington used to justify the invasion. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld insists they will be found.
And it could be because it's hard to find things in a country that's determined not to have you find them. And we'll just take our time and we'll go about that business. And my guess is that the kinds of things that the intelligence community provided Secretary Powell and Secretary Powell provided the United Nations will in fact be turned up to the extent that they're still there.
On April 21st, the US, backed up by a UN resolution, establishes the Coalition Provisional Authority, a transitional government for Iraq. Its first administrator, Jay Garner, retains Iraqi security forces for Phase 4. However, he clashes with leaders of Iraqi exiled opposition groups who return to Iraq with coalition forces. Most are Shia, a majority group which was historically repressed by the Sunni-dominated Ba'athist state. Some exiles demand the removal of Ba'ath Party officials from Iraqi society, known as de-Ba'athification. Bush replaces Garner with neoconservative diplomat Paul Bremer, who sides with controversial exiled Ahmed Chalabi. Chalabi wants extensive de-Ba'athification, and against advice from some experts, Bremer issues Order No. 1. The order purges Ba'ath Party members from the top management levels of state institutions, including ministries, universities, hospitals, and state-run corporations. It fires around 85,000, many with only a bureaucratic connection to Ba'athism. Critics argue they're often the most competent administrators. All of a sudden you say, these guys are not a part of society. These were the guys and gals in the doctor arena, in the professional arena, that you can't do without. Bremer's next order, Order No. 2, disbands the Iraqi military, Ministry of the Interior, and President's Security Force, around 730,000 people. Opponents say the Iraqi military, one of the few largely non-sectarian institutions in Iraq, is not inherently Ba'athist. They claim Saddam did not trust his generals, and only half are Ba'ath Party members. Staff Colonel Baha Nouri Yassin is a newly unemployed officer. The real military men like me didn't care whether the army was under the control of Saddam or whoever. We were the Army of Iraq, a professional army for the country. Many of us wanted to continue working for the country regardless of the political changes. We had the same mentality as most other good armies of the world. We served the state, not individual rulers. Bremer argues de-Ba'athification cleanses Iraq of Saddam loyalists, and Iraqi forces can be rebuilt from the ground up. He appoints Chalabi to oversee de-Ba'athification and cancels planned elections, instead appointing an Iraq governing council from all Iraqi demographic groups. So the US had decided on de-Ba'athification despite the risks, and Order No. 2 sends a shockwave through Iraq. Some Sunnis protest in the streets and argue the orders are retribution aimed at their community. This discontent soon turns violent. Initially, US troops reported a welcome but reserved reaction from Iraqis. With few exceptions, we were not being shot at. I could walk the streets anywhere in Baghdad. Most Iraqis there still viewed us as liberators, even if they did not particularly like us culturally. But following Bremer's de-Ba'athification orders, US troops, especially in the so-called Sunni Triangle, report increased opposition. As well as unemployment, Iraqis complain of lack of infrastructure repair, disrespect, and US troops firing on civilians. US sources often claim they came under fire, and some units, like the 4th Infantry Division, gain a reputation for itchy trigger fingers. Sergeant Gayle Williams of the 101st Airborne recalls. We slowly drove past 4th Infantry guys looking mean and ugly. They stood up on top of their trucks, their weapons pointed directly at civilians. What could these locals possibly have done? Why was this intimidation necessary? No one explained anything, but it looked weird and felt wrong. Throughout summer 2003, insurgent-style attacks increase. US forces focus on hunting down the remnants of Saddam's state, including killing his sons in a firefight in Mosul in July. At first, they don't recognize the growing guerrilla movement. Most insurgents do not belong to a wider network, but carry out opportunistic attacks using looted weapons. Many early insurgents are informal groups, often including former military officers. By late summer, improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, become the main insurgent weapon against unarmored convoys. Insurgent Omar Youssef Hussein describes his first attack. We took an old artillery shell and bored into the casing with a hand drill to reach the explosive material. A lot of people saw us. Everyone knew what we were doing. They saw us planting the bomb, but said nothing. It all seemed like a game, honestly. We ran a wire from the bomb through the fields off the road. After about an hour, we saw a Humvee, and at the right moment, we detonated. I was in tears. I didn't know whether I was crying out of sadness or fear or happiness. Maybe all those reasons. IEDs quickly evolved from hardwired to remotely detonated versions. Bomb attacks also target international organizations like the UN, World Bank, and humanitarian NGOs. In fall 2003, insurgents launch a Ramadan offensive, and by late October, more US troops have died in the post-war phase than during the invasion. US forces often improvise their counterinsurgency methods. Officers develop makeshift methods of defeating IEDs, including jamming signals, and use conventional tactics for dealing with insurgents, such as air and artillery strikes. Commanders give troops more freedom to use their weapons. So by late 2003, the US is struggling to contain a growing insurgency. Some officers order large-scale sweep and clear operations of towns with insurgent cells. This requires more troops, but in the years before the war, the US military shrank. The private sector provides one solution. The US makes extensive use of private military companies, or PMCs, during the occupation of Iraq. Since 1990, the US military privatized certain non-combat roles to reduce the size of land forces by a third. Much of this occurred under Vice President Dick Cheney's tenure as Defense Secretary from 1989 to 1993. In Iraq, the US hires PMCs to provide security or to train Iraqi forces. Blackwater becomes the most prominent PMC in Iraq with a $1 billion 5-year contract. Although contracted to protect key figures, including Bremer, Blackwater critics claim it also conducts special forces-style operations and interrogations, resulting in abuses and unaccountability. PMC advocates claim their corporate nature makes them more accountable through regular reporting to clients, and that PMCs would not act in a way that could damage their brand. Colonel Theodore Westhusing, a West Point professor investigating claims of PMC abuse and corruption, later allegedly commits suicide in Baghdad, reportedly due to arguments with commanders regarding PMC behavior. The US also relies on contractors for reconstruction. In March 2003, the US grants Kellogg, Brown & Root, a subsidiary of Halliburton, a $7 billion reconstruction contract. Critics claim Halliburton avoided rival bids due to its relationship with former Halliburton CEO Dick Cheney. Washington responds that competitive bidding is impossible due to the classified nature of some work. Reconstruction does not go well, partly due to Iraqi inexperience after a decade of economic sanctions. Large amounts of imported equipment are destroyed as they're incompatible with Iraqi infrastructure and training. So by late 2003, US optimism is fading as casualties and costs increase. Even a major intelligence and political victory in December 2003 only has a minor impact on Iraqi fortunes. Since May, a specialist task force has been hunting for Saddam Hussein. Initial efforts to find Saddam through capturing and interrogating leading government officials don't work. The Iraqi government scattered in the final days of the regime, and Saddam rarely trusted his senior ministers. So US intelligence then focuses on Saddam's relationship with notable families and bodyguards. This is more successful, and interrogations led US Special Forces and 4th Infantry Division soldiers to a farm near Tikrit. On December 13th, they find Saddam hiding in a hole. When found, he reportedly states, "I am Saddam Hussein. I am the president of Iraq, and I am willing to negotiate." Saddam's capture is a PR victory for the US domestically, but has limited impact on the insurgency. The US quickly realizes he's not the center of a resistance network. Many factors influence insurgents, especially Sunni, including de-Baathification, religious conservatism, concerns about Iranian influence in the Shia-dominated governing council, or simply money. Insurgent leaders, some now abroad, pay up to $100 for a single attack. The monthly salary in the new Iraqi army is $150. Insurgent Mohammed Ra'ad Ahmed explains. "They gave us money too, of course. I needed money badly then, believe me. We all did. I used my share to move my family to Syria since the situation in Iraq was getting very bad then." Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia, a splinter group of Al-Qaeda led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, also brings foreign fighters into Iraq, but they remain a minority and their attitudes clash with some locals. The foreigners were uneducated and had weird ideas about religion, like they'd been brainwashed by fanatics. They forbid smoking, for example. Anyone caught with a cigarette would have his fingers chopped off. They would not allow vegetable sellers to display cucumbers and tomatoes next to each other, because they considered that too erotic. And believe it or not, they put underwear on sheep. They apparently thought it was against Islam to allow a female animal to expose her genitals. Yes, I'm serious, believe it or not. Insurgents and foreign fighters gather in towns like Fallujah, west of Baghdad. Fallujah announced its own government in April 2003 and mostly avoided looting. It's home to Ba'athist officials and is culturally conservative, even by Iraqi standards. Tensions are high in the city following a spring 2003 shooting incident which killed 17. On March 31, 2004, tensions boil over when insurgents kill and display the bodies of 4 Blackwater contractors. The images cause outrage in the US, with media and politicians calling for action. Bush aide and veterans activist Jack Wheeler states, "Fallujah must be destroyed. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean for the entire population of the city to be given 24 hours to leave. Then the entire city carpet bombed by B-52s into rubble. The rubble ground into powdered rubble by Abrams tanks, and the powdered rubble sown with salt as the Romans did with Carthage. Fallujah must be physically obliterated from the face of the earth." 1st Marine Division Commander James Mattis warns against hasty retaliation. But on April 5th, Bremer orders his 2,500 US Marines, supported by tanks and attack helicopters, into Fallujah. They encourage women and children to leave, but many remain as, according to local customs, it's inappropriate for women to travel unaccompanied. As Marines enter Fallujah, insurgents, often organized into mosque militias, resist. US forces use firepower to eliminate enemy positions, including calling in strikes from an AC-130 gunship nicknamed Slayer. The destruction of mosques and civilian homes concerns Muslim groups and US allies, although US commanders claim they target carefully. Embedded journalist Robert Kaplan recalls, "Almost all the fire and explosions I heard were incoming. The insurgents could fire indiscriminately and blame collateral damage on the Americans, whereas the Americans picked and chose their shots carefully. There was zero tolerance for civilian casualties, though it was impossible to meet the standard always." Aid organizations and Al Jazeera News Network carry stories of civilian suffering, and reinforcing Iraqi troops refuse to enter the city. On April 9th, as diplomatic pressure mounts, the US announces an end to operations. The US frames the withdrawal as an agreement with local leaders to end insurgent support. US casualties are 36 killed, with likely around 200 insurgents killed. Estimates of civilian casualties reach 749. Mattis is irritated and says the insurgents were near breaking point. Instead, insurgents present Fallujah as a victory, and the indecisive end is a psychological blow to US credibility. Things get worse in late April. On April 28th, CBS's 60 Minutes shows US soldiers abusing and torturing detainees at the Abu Ghraib prison. The images show detainees hooded, electrocuted, attacked with dogs, and put in humiliating positions by guards. In some cases, detainees die under these conditions. The scandal reaches international proportions, and US Special Forces Commander Stanley McChrystal later states that nearly every captured jihadist said Abu Ghraib motivated their actions. A US investigation concluded the Army Reserve unit in charge of Abu Ghraib was understaffed and undersupervised, although critics argue commanders at least tacitly sanctioned the abuse. US authorities later try 12 soldiers, but most receive only light sentences. So the US struggles in Fallujah and with the Abu Ghraib scandal. But even before Abu Ghraib was exposed, previously supportive Iraqis turn against the coalition. Initially, the US considers Shia groups in the south as likely supporters. The British run the occupation in the south and use experience from the conflict in Northern Ireland. UK forces adopt more restrained tactics than the Americans, patrolling without vehicles, regularly distributing questionnaires, and appointing former Ba'athist commanders to new security forces. Troops from other nationalities also aid the occupation forces in Baghdad, the British zone, and as part of a Polish-led multinational division. Altogether, around 30 nations contribute personnel, including larger contingents from Australia, South Korea, Italy, Spain, Georgia, the Netherlands, and Ukraine. But most contributions are much smaller and are under strict political control with limitations on combat operations. Some are already preparing to withdraw from Iraq. Shortly after Saddam's removal, several Shia political and religious groups emerge in the south, often led by Iraqi exiles. By 2004, most reject the occupation on ideological grounds, although some cooperate for pragmatic reasons. One growing movement is Jaish al-Mahdi, or the Mahdi Army. Led by Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr, it rejects Iranian influence and the occupation, and draws its support from poorer, younger Iraqis. Al-Sadr, whose father was a widely respected Shia leader, claims his organization does peaceful community work, but the British suspect it's behind most attacks around Basra. Nonetheless, British commanders take a diplomatic approach.
Whilst a lot of the population wouldn't identify with Sadr, and indeed they see Sadr as being a bit of an upstart, what they certainly see Sadr as being, though, is the son of his father, and his father was very much a hero and a martyr to the Shia. And as a result, an attack on Sadr is seen as an attack on the Shia.
Despite a relatively peaceful start in the south, tensions flare simultaneously to the Fallujah battle. On April 2nd, the CPA closes an anti-coalition Mahdi newspaper and Bremer orders al-Sadr arrested. Al-Sadr orders an uprising from militia in Baghdad, Basra, Kut, Karbala, Nasiriyah, Najaf, and several smaller towns. Shia militia are more coordinated than Sunni insurgents and destroy bridges to prevent US reinforcements moving south. The attacks cause tensions between coalition commanders. British, Spanish, and Italian troops conduct counteroffensives against militia elsewhere, but many multinational division forces remain in their bases. The British commander in Basra feels the uprising is an avoidable strategic error and refuses to attack militia-occupied government buildings. Most criticism is kept out of the public, but leaked documents later show tensions between the Allies. I now realize that I am a European, not an American. We managed to get on better with our European partners and at times with the Arabs than with the Americans. Europeans chat to each other, whereas dialogue is alien to the US military. Dealing with them corporately is akin to dealing with a group of Martians. If it isn't on the PowerPoint slide, then it doesn't happen. US troops, supported by an airlift and mobile armored groups, move into Mahdi-occupied towns. Fighting is especially fierce in Najaf. Adel Rashid Majid was one of the Shia militiamen fighting in the city's necropolis. Spread out in front of me were the Mahdi army firing towards the American line, all of them crouching behind gravestones. After watching the gun battle for so long, I could not resist the urge to fire. I took aim in the darkness towards the American positions as best I could and pulled the trigger. I knew I probably wouldn't hit anyone, I just wanted to let them know that yet another person ready to fight them was there. US and coalition forces clear Mahdi army positions through combat and negotiation, and kill several key commanders. In late June, al-Sadr accepts a ceasefire, although sporadic fighting continues. The suppression of the Shia uprisings restores some coalition military credibility after Fallujah. The US is now eager to shift the narrative from battling insurgents to reconstruction and stabilization.
Well, one of the things that I've seen, and I've gone on a number of patrols with 1st Cavalry Division out of Fort Hood, and it's not just going on security patrols. I've gone and looked at sewers. I've gone and looked at garbage disposal systems. What's happening in Iraq is slowly we're seeing, I've gotten to see firsthand, a country that's picking itself up from really 35 years of theft. That's really what Saddam's regime did to the entirety of the country. You know a little bit about what was going on with some of the scams, some of the various oil scams. Well, this country was impoverished by the Baathists, at least under Saddam's regime. And that's changing. It's taken a lot of capital, it's taken a lot of cash, it's taken a lot of sweat equity. And it's sweat equity not simply from coalition forces, but from Iraqis themselves.
The US has put down the Shia uprising and wants to move on. But spring and summer 2004 is the costliest period so far, killing around 250 US and coalition and 200 Iraqi troops. 1,600 Sunni and Shia insurgents and 4,500 civilians are also killed. Despite this, the US is eager to show progress. On June 28, 2004, Bremer's CPA disbands and is replaced by an interim Iraqi government, with elections planned for January 2005. The US and UN recognize it as the sovereign government of Iraq, but Sunnis boycott it, and it's divided between Shia factions, some of which sympathize with al-Sadr. Nonetheless, in late 2004, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld wants Iraqi forces and government to do more, or at least give operations an Iraqi face. But US training focuses on quantity over quality, and insurgent groups infiltrate Iraqi units. In Fallujah, Iraqi troops sent to handle security quickly disintegrate, with many joining the insurgents. By late 2004, Fallujah is again an insurgent-held town with increasing al-Qaeda presence. US commanders prepare for a second battle from June, building a berm around the town. More lenient evacuation criteria means that most of the 250,000 civilian population has left. Up to 5,000 insurgents remain in the city, and US forces keep them off balance with regular nighttime raids. US planners produce complex maps, giving each building in Fallujah a unique number, and they stockpile ammunition. By now, US attitudes have hardened.
The Marines that I've had wounded and killed over the past 5 months have been by a faceless enemy. And again, like I said, the enemy has got a face. He's called Satan, and he's in Fallujah, and we're going to destroy him.
At the core of the US force are 6,500 Marines in 2 regimental combat teams with 1,500 Army armor personnel and 2,000 Iraqi troops attached. British troops secure the roads to the east, while Marine regiments will attack from the north after diversionary attacks from the west. Army Sergeant David Bellavia describes the moment of moving out. Cigarettes are stomped out, last words are exchanged. We throw on our full battle rattle, which includes ballistic-proof eye protection, smoke grenades, reinforced knee pads any skateboarder would envy, 5-quart Camelback reservoir, interceptor ballistic armor, Kevlar helmet, night vision, grenades, weapon, and ammunition. It's about 65 pounds of gear, but we're so jacked up we scarcely notice the load. The main attack opens on November 8th. After extensive artillery and airstrikes, US armor rushes forward to penetrate insurgent positions and shock their defenders. Armored bulldozers clear the streets of rubble, followed by Marine and Iraqi forces. Each building on the axis of advance is cleared, with Marines occupying select buildings and using rooftops to move and fire on insurgents.
What's gonna happen? M16s, 240. We're gonna pop up. We're gonna do 5 seconds of suppression. All right? Slow on M16s, like 2 bursts. That way, Cole Pelton is gonna show me where the fire's come from, and I can look at the building, all right? It's you and you. Ready, set, go, hose up!
We'll use that.
Okay.
And then one aiming in that window.
Right?
That window right there. It's like a doorway.
Go! Go!
Marines encounter stiff resistance in the first days, including snipers, IEDs, and mortar attacks, especially in the south. Insurgents create reinforced hardpoints within buildings, demolish stairways to block US access to roofs, and booby-trap doorways. They also use tunnels and holes between buildings to hit and run. In some cases, insurgents pop up behind US forces and reoccupy buildings, requiring some to be cleared multiple times. As US casualties mount, US troops use armor, bulldozers, or JDAM bombs to demolish buildings occupied by the remaining insurgents.
There's probably a good 20 or 30 down in that last corner, and they're pinched right now. The whole division's got them surrounded, and this is where they were. They've been using this mosque over here to treat their wounded. So inside that mosque, it's all dirty, and this last strip of house is down to our front, about 300 meters, just full of them. Gunshot wounds and stuff, trying to get them treated, and they don't want to give up. We tried talking to them with our interpreter, getting them to surrender, walk out on the street. They're telling us they'd rather die than they then come out and surrender, so they're going to die.
By November 15th, the Americans break most organized resistance. But the battle has no clear end, and sporadic insurgent attacks continue until late December. US casualties are 95 killed, 56 in the first week, and 560 wounded. 8 Iraqi and 4 British troops also die. Up to 2,000 insurgents and 800 civilians are killed as well. Despite the US victory in Fallujah, the fierce fighting there undermines US claims that the war is over. The US did not prepare for a counterinsurgency and initially refused to accept it was facing guerrilla warfare. When it finally does, it portrays insurgents as fringe groups as opposed to a broader movement within Iraqi society. So US commanders fall back on what they know: force. This results in small-scale but strategically impactful events, resulting in both civilian and coalition casualties. Small-scale events with a large-scale impact via reporting or propaganda is termed the strategic corporal, and strategists note it benefits insurgents. Not only do Iraqi civilian casualties harden local opinion, coalition casualties weaken domestic war support. Media and war expert Mark Leahy states, "If a grieving relative condemns the conflict on the front page of a tabloid, in media terms, there's nothing that can be done. Instead of a short, successful war, the Iraq War is an international quagmire. Terrorists target coalition nations, while more foreign fighters enter Iraq, often driven by religious motivations. Al-Qaeda increasingly attacks civilian targets, likely to inflame sectarian civil war between Shia and Sunnis. Some of the first Iraqis who took up arms abandoned the cause after several months. We began to rethink things as time went on. How long were we supposed to keep this up? How long would it take to drive out the occupation with such tactics? If we attacked the occupation without an end in sight, what benefits would we get out of it? More chaos in the country? And we were being paid by Iranian money. What did that make us? Mercenaries? None of this seemed to us a benefit to Iraq, so we broke up our group and went our separate ways. But many in Iraq are still willing to fight. 2005 brings the prospect of new elections, but will also see Iraqis go from fighting foreign occupiers to fighting each other. If our history documentaries have inspired you to produce your own, or if you're just interested in historical film reels, the vast catalog of the US National Archive should be one of your first stops. Unfortunately, searching the National Archive catalog can be tricky, and even our researchers often have trouble finding the hidden gems among the tens of thousands of items. This is why we're thankful for the Archive Project, this video's sponsor. They helped us find some great footage for this Iraq War documentary. The Archive Project offers anyone a free, user-friendly way of researching and discovering National Archive footage. Their enhanced search makes NARA's huge collection of archival footage more accessible, not just to professional filmmakers and researchers, but to historians, educators, podcasters, and independent creators. There's no subscription fee to join. Anyone can watch films and research for free with an account. That includes watermark-free viewing of all films and access to NARA and federal identifiers and video transcriptions. If you're interested in downloading footage or audio files directly, you can choose from 2 paid subscription plans that offer included downloads, or you can stick with the free plan and still have access to affordable one-off download prices. To learn more about the Archive Project and start your research, just go to thearchiveproject.com and create your free account. We want to thank the Archive Project for sponsoring this documentary and helping with the production of our documentaries in general. To learn more about the initial US invasion of Iraq and the reasons why the US invaded in the first place, check out our previous 2 videos. If you're watching this video on Patreon or Nebula, thank you so much for the support. We couldn't do it without you. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is a production of Real Time History, and I am willing to negotiate.